The deafening whistle of the iron horse pierced the crisp autumn air as Eleanor Howard clutched her wailing infant to her breast, her body trembling not from the cold Colorado night, but from sheer exhaustion. The transcontinental railroad tracks stretched before her like parallel lines to nowhere, mocking her desperate situation as she collapsed beside them, her legs finally giving out after miles of walking. It was 1876, a year of celebration for many Americans as the nation marked its centennial, but for Eleanor, it was the year everything had fallen apart. Eleanor's tears mingled with those of her 2-month-old daughter, Lily, whose cries grew more desperate with each passing moment. The baby's face was red from the effort, tiny fists waving in protest against the cruel world she'd been born into. Eleanor tried to soothe her, but how could she when her own heart was breaking? Her milk had dried up days ago from stress and lack of nourishment, and the meager supplies she'd managed to grab when fleeing were long gone. "Hush now, my sweet girl," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking as she rocked Lily back and forth. "I know you're hungry, I know you're cold, Mama's trying. Mama's trying so hard." But the baby continued to cry, her desperate wails echoing across the empty plains surrounding the small station of Sonora, Colorado. The settlement was little more than a whistle stop, with its lone station building dark and empty at this late hour. Eleanor had hoped to catch the eastbound train, to somehow make her way back to her sister's home in Missouri, but she'd missed it by mere hours according to the schedule posted outside the locked station door. The next train wouldn't arrive until morning, and Eleanor wasn't sure she and Lily would survive the night. October in the Colorado Territory brought bitter cold when the sun went down, and her thin cotton dress offered little protection. She'd fled with nothing but the clothes on her back, her wedding band which she planned to sell for passage, and her precious baby. Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering how different things had been just months ago. She'd been a new bride, full of hope and dreams, married to Charles Howard, a man who'd seemed so charming and kind during their brief courtship. But the real Charles emerged after the wedding a gambling drunk with a cruel streak that widened with each passing day. When Eleanor discovered she was with child, she'd prayed for change, but Charles had only grown more resentful, more dangerous. 2 nights ago, after losing heavily at cards, he'd come home in a rage unlike anything she'd seen before. When he raised his hand not just to Eleanor, but toward the cradle where Lily slept, something in Eleanor snapped. She'd waited until he passed out, gathered Lily, and fled into the night, determined that her daughter would never know the sting of her father's hand. Now, as the wind picked up and Lily's cries grew more desperate, Eleanor wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Perhaps slow death at the hands of nature was no better than the life she'd left behind. "Please, God," she whispered, "if not for me, then for my innocent child. Send us help or take us quickly." As if in answer, the sound of hoofbeats cut through Lily's cries. Eleanor's heart leapt to her throat. Was it Charles? Had he somehow tracked them? She clutched Lily tighter, looking frantically for somewhere to hide, but her weary body refused to move. A lone rider emerged from the darkness, his silhouette growing larger as he approached. Mounted on a powerful dapple gray stallion, the man cut an imposing figure against the star-filled sky. Eleanor could make out the broad brim of his hat and the shape of a rifle in its scabbard. She drew in a sharp breath, preparing for the worst. The rider slowed his horse as he neared the station, clearly surprised to find anyone there at this hour. Eleanor watched with wary eyes as he dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. He was taller than most men she'd known, with broad shoulders and a confident stride that spoke of a man accustomed to the harsh realities of frontier life. "Evening, madam," he called out, his voice deep but gentle, respectful of the distance between them. "Everything all right over there?" Eleanor didn't respond immediately, years of caution making her hesitant. But Lily's continued wailing made secrecy impossible. "We're just waiting for the morning train," she finally replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her fear and exhaustion. The stranger approached slowly, leading his horse, careful not to startle her. As he came closer, the moonlight illuminated his features, a strong jawline darkened with several days' worth of beard, eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense that Charles had been, but there was something compelling about him, an air of quiet strength. "Stations closed till morning," he said, stating the obvious but without condescension. "Not a good place for a lady and a little one to be spending the night." Eleanor lifted her chin slightly, summoning what dignity she could muster. "We have nowhere else to go." The man's gaze settled on the crying infant, then back to Eleanor's face, taking in her disheveled appearance and the dark circles under her eyes. His expression softened with understanding. "Name's Isaiah Armstrong," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "I run cattle about 10 miles west of here." "Eleanor Howard," she replied cautiously, "and this is Lily." Isaiah nodded toward the baby. "She sounds mighty hungry." Eleanor fought back a fresh wave of tears. "She is. I haven't been able to feed her properly for a while now." Without another word, Isaiah Armstrong set his hat back on his head and turned to his saddlebags. He rummaged for a moment before producing a small tin canteen and a clean handkerchief. "It's goat's milk," he explained, offering both items to Eleanor. "Not ideal for a baby, but better than nothing. If you soak the cloth in it, she might be able to suck on it." Eleanor hesitated only briefly before accepting his offering. Her pride meant nothing compared to Lily's needs. With trembling hands, she dampened the handkerchief with milk and gently placed it against her daughter's lips. Lily's cries paused momentarily as she tasted the unfamiliar substance, then she began to suckle desperately on the makeshift nipple. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, relief washing over her as Lily quieted. Isaiah nodded, then looked up at the night sky. "Temperature's dropping fast. You two can't stay out here." "We'll be fine," Eleanor insisted, though they both knew it was a lie. "The train comes at first light." Isaiah regarded her for a long moment, seeming to weigh something in his mind. Then he unbuttoned his heavy wool duster coat and removed it in one smooth motion. "Your little one's still crying," he observed as Lily began to fuss again, the handkerchief having gone dry. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and carefully draped his coat around Eleanor's shoulders, creating a cocoon that enveloped both mother and child. The warmth was immediate, the coat still carrying the heat from his body and the lingering scent of tobacco, horses, and something uniquely his own. "Rest now," he said softly, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "You're both safe." The simple kindness of this stranger broke something in Eleanor. Tears she'd been fighting spilled over as she pulled the coat tighter around Lily, who had finally begun to quiet down, soothed by the warmth and the gentle rocking of her mother. "I can't take your coat," she protested weakly. "You'll freeze." Isaiah smiled slightly, and for the first time Eleanor noticed the gentle crinkles around his eyes. "I've weathered colder nights with less, but neither of you should be out here." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I have a cabin not far from here. It's not much, but there's a proper bed, a stove, and more milk for the little one." Eleanor stiffened, alarm bells ringing in her mind. A stranger offering shelter in the middle of nowhere, it could be a trap, something worse than what she'd fled. Isaiah seemed to read her thoughts. "You'd have the cabin to yourself, madam. I can bunk in the stable. First light, I'll bring you back for that train, no questions asked." He looked away, giving her space to consider his offer. "Or you can stay here, and I'll ride for the doctor in town. But he's a good hour away, and I'm not certain he'd come out at this hour." Eleanor looked down at Lily, who had nestled into the warmth of the coat, her tiny features relaxing for the first time in days. The decision wasn't really a decision at all. "We accept your kind offer, Mr. Armstrong," she said softly. "Isaiah," he corrected gently, then turned to his horse. "Can you ride? It would be faster." Eleanor nodded, though it had been years since she'd been on horseback. Isaiah helped her to her feet, his strong hands steadying but respectful. Then, with careful movements, he assisted her onto his horse, making sure the coat remained securely around her and Lily. Once they were settled, he swung up behind her, keeping a respectful distance while still providing support to ensure she wouldn't fall. "Hold tight to your little one," he advised as he took up the reins. "Brutus here has a smooth gait, but the trail can be rough in places." Eleanor nodded, grateful for the solid presence behind her as they set off into the darkness. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, at least, her baby was no longer crying beside the tracks. For tonight, they were warm, and for the first time since fleeing Charles, Eleanor allowed herself to breathe. The 10-mile journey to Isaiah Armstrong's ranch passed in relative silence, broken only by the rhythmic sound of the horse's hooves and an occasional soft murmur from Isaiah giving directions to his mount or checking on Eleanor's comfort. The vast Colorado sky stretched endlessly above them, stars scattered like diamond dust against the velvet blackness. Under different circumstances, Eleanor might have found it beautiful. Instead, her mind raced with questions about the man behind her. He seemed decent enough. Certainly his actions so far had been nothing but kind, but Eleanor had learned the hard way that men could wear many faces. Charles had been all charm and promises during their courtship, revealing his true nature only after the wedding vows were spoken. "Just over this ridge," Isaiah said, breaking into her thoughts. "You'll see the lights of the ranch house soon." True to his word, as they crested the hill, Eleanor saw the warm glow of lanterns illuminating the windows of a modest but well-maintained cabin. Beyond it stood a barn and several outbuildings, all nestled in a small valley protected from the worst of the elements by surrounding hills. "It's not much," Isaiah said, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice, "but it serves its purpose." "It looks wonderful," Eleanor replied honestly, thinking of the drafty, filthy apartment above the saloon where Charles had installed her after gambling away their first proper home. As they approached the cabin, a dog's bark split the air, followed by the appearance of a large black and white border collie racing toward them. "That's just Patch," Isaiah reassured her. "Best cattle dog in the territory, but he fancies himself the welcoming committee too." The dog circled the horse excitedly, tail wagging, but calmed immediately at a soft command from Isaiah. They stopped before the cabin, and Isaiah dismounted first, then reached up to help Eleanor down, his hands strong and sure around her waist. Even through the thick coat, she could feel the careful restraint in his touch, nothing presumptuous or improper. "Let's get you both inside and warmed up proper," he said, leading the way to the cabin door. The interior was simple but surprisingly homey. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, embers still glowing from an earlier fire. A wooden table with 4 chairs sat in the center of the main room, while a cast iron stove stood ready for cooking. Through an open doorway, Eleanor glimpsed a bedroom with a neatly made bed covered in what appeared to be handmade quilts. Isaiah moved efficiently, stirring the fire back to life and adding more logs until flames danced merrily, casting a golden glow throughout the room. Then he lit several lamps, illuminating the space further. "The bedroom's yours," he said, gesturing toward the doorway. "I changed the sheets just yesterday, so they're clean. There's a washstand in there too, with fresh water." Eleanor stood awkwardly just inside the door, still wrapped in his coat, Lily sleeping against her chest. "This is very kind of you, Mr. Armstrong." "Isaiah," she corrected herself, remembering his preference. "I don't know how to thank you properly." Something like sadness flickered across his face. No need for thanks. Any decent man would do the same. The way he emphasized decent made Eleanor wonder what he'd seen in his life to make such a distinction necessary. He moved to a cupboard and took out a pottery jar. More goat's milk. "It'll keep until morning. There's bread and some stew left from supper too, if you're hungry." Eleanor's stomach growled audibly at the mention of food, and she flushed with embarrassment. Isaiah pretended not to notice. "I'll just see to Brutus, then fetch some things from the barn for myself." He paused at the door. "Lock this behind me. I won't come back in unless you call." After he left, Eleanor did as instructed, turning the heavy iron key in the lock. The simple act of securing a door, of having control over who entered a space, felt foreign after months of Charles bursting in whenever he pleased, often drunk and violent. Moving to the bedroom, Eleanor gently laid Lily on the bed, surrounding her with pillows to prevent her from rolling, though at her age that wasn't yet a concern. The baby stirred but remained asleep, her tiny face peaceful for the first time in days. Eleanor took a moment to look around the bedroom. Unlike the sparse, functional nature of the main room, this space held personal touches. A bookshelf stood against one wall, filled with well-worn volumes. A handcrafted rocking chair sat in the corner by a window, with what looked like a half-finished piece of whittling on the small table beside it. On the bureau lay a silver pocket watch and a daguerreotype in a simple frame. Curiosity getting the better of her, Eleanor moved closer to examine the photograph. It showed a young woman with a serious expression, her hair styled in the fashion of a decade earlier. The resemblance to Isaiah was striking, the same strong jawline and direct gaze. A sister, perhaps, or a cousin. Feeling suddenly like an intruder, Eleanor turned away from the personal items and attended to her own needs. At the washstand, she removed Isaiah's coat, draping it carefully over the rocking chair, and used the cool water to wash her face and hands. The simple act of cleansing away days of grime and tears felt almost ceremonial, as if she were washing away her old life along with the dirt. When she returned to the main room, she found Isaiah had left a covered pot of stew warming on the stove and a plate with several slices of bread beside it. Her stomach growled again, and this time Eleanor didn't resist the hunger. She served herself a generous portion and sat at the table, savoring each spoonful of the hearty stew. It was simple fare chunks of venison, potatoes, and carrots in a rich broth, but to Eleanor, it tasted better than any fine restaurant meal she'd had during the brief good times with Charles. A soft knock at the door startled her mid-bite. "Just me," came Isaiah's voice. "Don't need to open up. Just wanted to let you know I'm settled in the barn and Patch is on guard outside. If you need anything, just call out or ring the bell by the door." "Thank you," Eleanor called back, touched by his consideration. Are you sure you'll be warm enough out there?" There was a pause before he answered, and she could almost imagine his smile. "The hay loft's plenty warm, Mrs. Howard. I've slept in far worse conditions on cattle drives. Rest well." She heard his footsteps retreating and returned to her meal, pondering the strange turn her life had taken. Yesterday, she'd been a desperate woman fleeing an abusive husband with nothing but her child and the clothes on her back. Tonight, she was safe, warm, and fed, thanks to the kindness of a stranger. After finishing her meal, Eleanor checked on Lily, who continued to sleep peacefully. She prepared the goat's milk as Isaiah had shown her, setting it ready for when the baby woke hungry. Then, for the first time in what felt like forever, Eleanor Howard allowed herself to truly rest, curling up beside her daughter on the comfortable bed, pulling the handmade quilts around them both. Her last conscious thought before drifting into sleep was that Isaiah Armstrong's coat still hung on the rocking chair, carrying with it the scent of the man who had rescued them from the cold and darkness beside the railroad tracks. Morning arrived with the soft glow of dawn filtering through the cabin's eastward window. Eleanor woke to the unfamiliar sensation of comfort, a real bed beneath her, warm blankets above, and her daughter still sleeping peacefully beside her. For a moment, she simply lay still, savoring the quiet and the absence of fear that had been her constant companion for so long. Lily stirred, making the small snuffling noises that preceded waking. Eleanor quickly prepared the goat's milk, dampening a clean cloth she found folded in a drawer. When Lily's eyes fluttered open, Eleanor was ready, offering the makeshift nipple to her hungry daughter. "Good morning, my sweet girl," she whispered, stroking Lily's soft cheek as she suckled eagerly. "We made it through another night." From outside came the sounds of morning on a working ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, a rooster's crow, and the familiar barking of Patch. Eleanor heard Isaiah's voice giving commands to the dog, then the creaking of the barn door. He was already at work, giving her privacy to begin her day. After feeding Lily and changing her with clean rags, she found in a chest clearly stored from some past need Eleanor washed, and dressed them both as best she could in their travel-worn clothes. She made the bed with military precision, trying to leave the room exactly as she'd found it. Then, gathering her courage and her daughter, she unlocked the cabin door and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The view took her breath away. In the darkness of their arrival, she hadn't appreciated the beauty of Isaiah's land. The cabin sat nestled in a small valley, surrounded by golden aspen trees whose leaves trembled in the morning breeze. Beyond the immediate clearing, Pine-covered hills rose in gentle slopes, and in the far distance, the majestic peaks of mountains still capped with snow stood sentinel against the blue sky. A small creek bubbled cheerfully near the barn, and several horses grazed in a corral nearby. Isaiah emerged from the barn carrying a bucket of milk, Patch trotting faithfully at his heels. When he spotted Eleanor, he paused, then altered his course toward her. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat with his free hand. "Sleep well, better than I have in months," Eleanor admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." Isaiah nodded toward the milk bucket. "Just finished the morning milking. If you'd like to try some fresh goat's milk for the little one, it might sit better than the stored." "That would be wonderful," Eleanor said, following him back to the cabin. Inside, Isaiah set about preparing breakfast, waving off Eleanor's offers to help. "You tend to your daughter," he insisted. "I've been cooking for myself since I was 12. Won't claim it's fancy, but it's edible." As he worked frying salt pork, mixing biscuit dough, and setting coffee to boil, Eleanor saw a different side of the man who had rescued them. In the light of day, she could better appreciate his steady movements and the quiet confidence with which he handled even domestic tasks. His rolled-up shirt sleeves revealed forearms corded with muscle from years of physical labor, and his hands, though large and calloused, moved with surprising deftness. "The train to Pueblo passes through Sonora around noon," he said as he set plates of food on the table. "I can have you back at the station with plenty of time to spare." Eleanor's heart sank at the reminder of reality. Of course she couldn't stay here. This brief respite was just that brief. She had to keep moving to get as far from Charles as possible. "That would be very kind," she said, settling Lily in her lap as she took a seat at the table. "I'm hoping to make it to Missouri eventually. My sister lives there." Isaiah nodded, taking his own seat across from her. "Pueblo's a good starting point. You can catch the eastbound from there." He hesitated, then added, "Do you have funds for the journey?" Eleanor fingered the wedding band she still wore. "I plan to sell this. It should be enough for tickets." Isaiah's gaze fell to the gold band, then back to her face. His expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes, understanding, perhaps. He didn't pry, didn't ask why a married woman with an infant would be fleeing alone in the night, and Eleanor was grateful for his discretion. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by Lily's occasional coos and the natural sounds of the morning. Isaiah offered seconds, which Eleanor accepted gratefully, still making up for days of near starvation. As she ate, she found herself studying him surreptitiously. In daylight, she could see that Isaiah Armstrong was perhaps in his early 30s, with dark brown hair streaked with hints of copper where the sun had lightened it. His face was tanned and weathered from outdoor life, with smile lines around his eyes despite his serious demeanor. A small scar bisected his left eyebrow, and another marked his chin beneath his short beard. They were the marks of a life lived honestly and sometimes roughly on the frontier. "Have you lived here long?" she asked, breaking the silence. Isaiah glanced up from his coffee. "Going on 8 years now. Came west after the war between the states, like many did. Worked as a ranch hand until I saved enough to buy this place." "You've done well for yourself," Eleanor observed, looking around the well-maintained cabin. "It's a beautiful piece of land." A hint of pride crossed his features. "It provides. Got about 100 head of cattle now, a dozen horses, some goats and chickens. Not the biggest spread in Colorado, but it's mine." He paused, then added quietly, "Free and clear." The way he said those last words made Eleanor think they carried special significance for him. "You manage all this alone?" she asked, realizing she'd seen no sign of other workers. "Mostly. Hire a couple of local boys during calving season and roundup. Rest of the time, it's just me and Patch." He gestured to the dog, who lay alertly by the door, watching their interaction with intelligent eyes. Eleanor nodded, trying to imagine the solitary life he led. "Don't you get lonely?" The question slipped out before she could stop herself, and she immediately regretted its presumptuous nature. "I'm sorry, that was terribly forward of me." Isaiah didn't seem offended. He considered the question with the same thoughtfulness he seemed to apply to everything. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I've got my books for company in winter, and work keeps me busy enough the rest of the year." He shrugged slightly. Man gets used to his own company after a while. There was something in his tone, not quite sadness, but perhaps resignation that touched Eleanor deeply. Here was a man who had carved out a life for himself through hard work and determination, yet he sat alone at his table each morning, with only a dog for companionship. Before she could respond, Lily began to fuss, squirming in Eleanor's lap. "Someone needs changing," she said with an apologetic smile. "Take your time," Isaiah said, rising to clear the plates. "We've got a while before we need to head to the station." Eleanor returned to the bedroom to attend to Lily's needs. As she changed her daughter, her mind kept returning to the train that would arrive at noon. It represented both escape and uncertainty. She had a vague plan: reach her sister in Missouri, try to build a new life, but the details were frighteningly unclear. How long would her sister's welcome last? How would she support herself and Lily? What if Charles somehow tracked them down? When she emerged from the bedroom with a freshly changed and content Lily, she found Isaiah had cleared breakfast and was securing what looked like provisions in a small sack. "Just some things for your journey," he explained, seeing her curious glance. "Bread, cheese, dried meat, and a bottle of milk for the little one." "Oh, I couldn't," Eleanor began, but Isaiah cut her off with a gentle shake of his head. "Please. It's a long ride to Pueblo, and train food costs more than it's worth." Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat. "You've done so much already." Isaiah looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just being neighborly," he said, though they both knew his actions went well beyond what most would consider neighborly duty. As he turned to fetch his coat, Eleanor noticed him wince slightly, his hand moving unconsciously to his left shoulder. "Are you injured?" she asked with concern. Isaiah dropped his hand immediately. "Old war wound, acts up sometimes when I sleep cold, nothing to worry about." Eleanor felt a pang of guilt. "You slept in the barn because of us." "And I'd do it again," he said simply. "Shall we get ready to ride?" The journey back to Sonora was different in daylight. Eleanor could now appreciate the beauty of the landscape. They traversed rolling hills covered in golden prairie grass, stands of aspen and pine, and the occasional glimpse of deer bounding away at their approach. Isaiah pointed out landmarks as they rode, naming creeks and distant peaks with the familiarity of someone who knew every inch of this land. They rode double again, with Lily secured in a makeshift sling Isaiah had fashioned from a soft blanket. This time, Eleanor felt more aware of the man behind her, the solid strength of him, the careful way he held the reins to avoid jostling them, the deep voice that occasionally rumbled instruction to the horse or observation about the terrain. When the small settlement of Sonora came into view, Eleanor felt an unexpected reluctance to reach their destination. The train would take her away from danger, yes, but also away from this man who had shown her more kindness in one night than Charles had in their entire marriage. The station was alive with activity as they arrived. The noon train was expected shortly, and several passengers waited on the platform with their luggage. Isaiah helped Eleanor and Lily down from the horse, then tied Brutus to a hitching post. "Let's get you a ticket," he said, leading the way to the ticket window. Eleanor reached into her pocket for the wedding band, but Isaiah was already placing coins on the counter. "One ticket to Pueblo," he told the station agent. "Lady with an infant." "Isaiah, no," Eleanor protested. "You've done too much already." But the transaction was already complete. The ticket passed across the counter. "Consider it a loan if it eases your mind," Isaiah said quietly. "Pay it forward to someone else in need someday." The station agent announced the train would arrive in 15 minutes. Isaiah guided Eleanor to a bench on the platform, setting the provisions sack beside her. "I should be getting back," he said, though he made no move to leave. "Of course," Eleanor said, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. "You have work to do." Isaiah nodded, his eyes moving to Lily, who was awake and looking around curiously. "She looks better today. Amazing what a night's rest and some proper food can do. For both of us," Eleanor agreed softly. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with words neither seemed able to say. Finally, Isaiah reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "My direction," he explained, holding it out to her. In case you need anything, or just to let me know you arrived safely." Eleanor took the paper, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Thank you." "For everything." In the distance, the whistle of the approaching train pierced the air. Isaiah glanced toward the sound, then back to Eleanor. He seemed about to speak when a commotion at the far end of the platform drew their attention. A man had burst into the station area, red-faced and wild-eyed. Eleanor's blood froze in her veins as she recognized him instantly. Charles Howard, his usually neat appearance disheveled, his face contorted with rage. "There you are, you thieving bitch," he shouted, pointing directly at Eleanor. "Did you think you could take my child and run?" Eleanor instinctively clutched Lily closer as Charles began pushing through the small crowd toward them. Terror paralyzed her limbs, even as her mind screamed at her to run. Isaiah reacted immediately, stepping between Eleanor and the advancing threat. "Sir," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable warning, "I suggest you watch your language and your behavior in front of these ladies and gentlemen." Charles halted momentarily, sizing up the cowboy who blocked his path. "This doesn't concern you, mister. That's my wife and child, and she's coming home with me." Eleanor found her voice at last. "No, Charles, I'm not going back, not ever." Charles's face darkened further. "You don't have a choice, Eleanor. You're my wife, that's my daughter." He looked to the onlookers playing to the crowd. "Can you believe this? My own wife runs off with our newborn while I'm working to put food on the table. Now I find her with this cowboy." Several in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, unsure whose side to take in what appeared to be a domestic dispute. Isaiah hadn't moved, his tall frame a physical barrier between Charles and Eleanor. "Madam says she's not going with you," he stated calmly. "I suggest you respect the lady's wishes." Charles laughed bitterly. "Lady, you don't know her very well, do you? Ask her where she was before we married. Ask her what she did for money." Eleanor flinched as if struck. Charles was referring to her brief time working as a singer in a saloon after her parents died, perfectly respectable work, but he twisted it to sound shameful. "I don't care what she did before," Isaiah replied evenly. "I care about what you're doing now, which is frightening a mother and her child." The train whistle sounded again, much closer now. Charles's eyes darted toward the approaching locomotive, then back to Eleanor. His hand moved to his belt, where Eleanor knew he kept a small pistol. "Last chance, Eleanor," he warned. "Come home now, or I swear to God." Isaiah moved so quickly that Eleanor barely registered what happened. One moment Charles was threatening her, the next he was on his knees, his arm twisted painfully behind him by Isaiah's firm grip, the pistol now in Isaiah's free hand. "That's not how a man talks to the mother of his child," Isaiah said, his voice low and dangerous. "That's not how a man behaves at all." The sheriff, attracted by the commotion, pushed through the gathered onlookers. "What's going on here?" he demanded, hand on his own sidearm. Charles immediately began pleading his case. "This man assaulted me. I was just trying to retrieve my wife and child after threatening them." Isaiah cut in, releasing Charles but keeping the pistol. He handed the weapon to the sheriff. This man drew on a woman holding an infant. The sheriff looked from Isaiah, whom he clearly recognized, to Charles, then to Eleanor with Lily clutched protectively to her chest. "Mrs. Howard," the sheriff addressed her directly, surprising Eleanor that he knew her name. "Is what Mr. Armstrong says true? Did your husband threaten you?" Eleanor nodded, finding courage in Isaiah's steadfast presence. "He did, and it's not the first time, Sheriff. I fled our home because I feared for our safety." The sheriff's expression hardened as he turned back to Charles, who was now getting to his feet, brushing dirt from his trousers. "Mr. Howard, I've heard rumors about you. Seems they weren't exaggerated." The train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a billow of steam. "I suggest you board that train, Mr. Howard," the sheriff continued, "and continue on to wherever you were headed before you decided to cause trouble in my town. And don't come back to Sonora." "You can't do this," Charles sputtered. "She's my wife, that's my child." "I can and I am," the sheriff replied coolly. "Unless you'd prefer to spend some time in my jail for disturbing the peace and threatening deadly force." He patted the confiscated pistol for emphasis. Charles looked from the sheriff to Isaiah, who stood impassively watching, to Eleanor, who met his gaze without flinching for the first time in their relationship. Something in his expression changed, a calculation taking place behind his eyes. Finally, he spat on the ground near Isaiah's boots. "Keep the bitch," he snarled, "and the brat too. Not worth the trouble anyway." With that, he turned and stalked toward the train, shouldering roughly past waiting passengers. They watched as he boarded a car near the front of the train, disappearing inside without a backward glance. The sheriff turned to Eleanor. "Madam, are you all right?" Eleanor nodded, though her entire body trembled with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. "Yes, thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me," he replied with a nod toward Isaiah. "Armstrong here is the one who stepped in." He tipped his hat to them both. "I'll make sure Howard leaves on that train. You folks take care now." As the sheriff walked away, the train conductor called for all aboard. Eleanor looked at the waiting train, then at Isaiah, conflict written plainly on her face. "You don't have to go," Isaiah said quietly, voicing the thought that had formed in both their minds. Eleanor clutched Lily tighter. "I can't impose on you any further. You've already done so much." "It wouldn't be an imposition," he replied, his eyes earnest. "The cabin gets mighty empty sometimes." The last call for boarding echoed across the platform. Eleanor looked at the train that would take her to an uncertain future, then back at the man who had not only saved them from the cold night, but had just stood between her and the danger she most feared. "What are you suggesting, Mr. Armstrong?" she asked, needing to hear him say it clearly. Isaiah took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting you and Lily stay at my ranch at least until you figure out your next steps. No expectations, no obligations. The bedroom is yours. I'll bunk in the spare room off the kitchen. You'd be safe there." The conductor waved his final signal. In seconds, the choice would be made for her as the train pulled away. "All aboard that's coming aboard," the conductor shouted. Eleanor looked down at Lily, who gazed back with innocent eyes that somehow seemed to hold wisdom beyond her weeks. Then she looked at Isaiah Armstrong, this quiet, honorable man who had wrapped them both in his coat and offered them shelter when they needed it most. "I think," she said slowly, watching relief flood Isaiah's features, "we might stay in Colorado a while longer." The train whistle blew one final time, and with a great chugging and hissing, the locomotive began to pull away from the station. Eleanor watched it go, Charles Howard aboard, carrying away a chapter of her life she was more than ready to close. Isaiah smiled the first full, genuine smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his face completely. "Let's go home then," he said, offering his arm to escort her back to where Brutus waited patiently. As they walked away from the tracks and the departing train, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope, fragile but undeniable, blossoming in her heart like a desert flower after rain. The journey back to Isaiah's ranch carried none of the tension or uncertainty of their trip to the station. Instead, a strange sense of rightness settled over Eleanor as they rode, Lily once again secured safely between them. The decision to stay had been impulsive, perhaps even reckless, but for the first time in years, Eleanor felt as though she was moving toward something rather than simply running away. "You're very quiet," Isaiah observed as Brutus navigated the familiar trail. "Having second thoughts?" "No," Eleanor replied truthfully, "just thinking about how quickly life can change. Yesterday I had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Today." She trailed off, uncertain how to describe what today represented. "Today you have choices," Isaiah finished for her. "That's no small thing." No small thing indeed. Choice had been the first casualty of her marriage to Charles, eroded so gradually she hardly noticed until it was gone entirely. Now, the simple act of deciding not to board that train felt like reclaiming a piece of herself long surrendered. They arrived at the ranch in mid-afternoon, the golden October sunlight casting long shadows across the yard. Isaiah helped Eleanor down from the horse, his hands strong and steady around her waist, before leading Brutus toward the barn. "Make yourself at home," he called over his shoulder. "I'll just see to Brutus and then check on the herd. Won't be long." Eleanor carried Lily into the cabin, which already felt strangely familiar despite having spent only one night beneath its roof. She fed and changed her daughter. Then, with the baby contentedly sleeping in the center of the big bed, Eleanor set about exploring her temporary home more thoroughly. The cabin was larger than it first appeared, with the main room serving as both kitchen and living area, the bedroom she'd used, and what Isaiah had called the spare room, little more than an alcove off the kitchen with a narrow cot. Eleanor's heart twisted at the thought of his tall frame cramped in such a small space, especially after he'd spent the previous night in the barn. The cabin showed evidence of a solitary male occupant, practical furnishings, minimal decorations, tools and books the primary possessions. But it was also meticulously clean and well organized, revealing a man who took pride in his home despite having no one to impress. With Lily still sleeping soundly, Eleanor decided to make herself useful. She checked the pantry and found it well stocked with basics: flour, sugar, coffee, preserved fruits and vegetables, and cured meats. Clearly, Isaiah prepared for the isolation winter would bring. Inspired, Eleanor set about preparing a proper meal, something to thank him for his extraordinary kindness. By the time Isaiah returned, the cabin was filled with the aroma of baking bread and simmering stew. He paused in the doorway, hat in hand, an expression of surprise and something deeper, perhaps longing, crossing his features before he schooled them back to his usual reserve. "You didn't have to cook," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "I wanted to," Eleanor replied, suddenly shy. "It's the least I can do to thank you." Isaiah crossed to the wash basin by the back door, rolling up his sleeves to wash away the day's dirt. "No thanks necessary. Having company is payment enough." As they ate dinner that evening, with Lily awake and cradled in one of Eleanor's arms, conversation flowed more easily between them. Isaiah shared stories of his early days in Colorado, the challenges and triumphs of establishing his ranch. Eleanor, in turn, spoke of her childhood in Illinois, her parents' early deaths, and her journey west with dreams of a new beginning. She carefully avoided discussing Charles or their marriage, and Isaiah seemed to sense her boundaries, never pressing for details she wasn't ready to share. His consideration only increased Eleanor's growing admiration for him. "I should warn you," Isaiah said as they finished the meal, "I ride out early most mornings to check the herd. I'll try not to wake you." "Please don't change your routines on our account," Eleanor insisted. "This is your home." "We're just guests." Isaiah regarded her thoughtfully. "You're more than guests, Eleanor. You're welcome here for as long as you want to stay." The simple sincerity of his statement touched her deeply. "Thank you, but I can't impose forever. I'll need to find work eventually, make my own way." "No rush on that account," Isaiah assured her. "Winter's coming soon. Most folks around here hunker down till spring anyway." He hesitated, then added, "Truth is, having you and Lily here, it makes the place feel more like a home than it has in years." That night, as Eleanor lay in Isaiah's comfortable bed with Lily sleeping beside her, she found herself wondering about the man on the narrow cot in the alcove. Who was Isaiah Armstrong, really? What had shaped him into the kind, honorable man who would offer shelter to strangers without hesitation? Why did someone with so much to offer live alone in this beautiful but isolated valley? The questions followed her into sleep, where dreams of warm brown eyes and gentle hands replaced the nightmares that had plagued her since fleeing Charles. Days slipped into weeks with surprising ease. October gave way to November, bringing colder temperatures and occasional snow flurries that dusted the valley like powdered sugar before melting away under the still strong sun. Eleanor and Isaiah established a rhythm together that felt as natural as breathing. Each morning, Isaiah rose before dawn to tend to the animals and check the cattle. Eleanor would wake to the soft sounds of him moving about the cabin, preparing coffee before heading out. By the time she and Lily were up, there would be a fresh pot waiting on the stove and often a note telling her when to expect him back. Eleanor took over the cooking and household chores, finding satisfaction in creating order and comfort in the cabin. She discovered Isaiah's mending pile and set about repairing shirts and socks with neat, even stitches. When he protested that she needn't work so hard, she gently explained that contributing to the household helped her feel less like a charity case and more like a partner. The word partner had hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken meaning, but neither acknowledged it directly, Lily thrived under the stable routine, growing plumper and more alert each day. She began to smile responsively, especially at Isaiah, whose deep voice seemed to fascinate her. Eleanor caught him more than once speaking softly to the baby when he thought she wasn't listening, telling Lily about the ranch animals or describing the mountains in the distance. One crisp morning in late November, Eleanor was hanging freshly washed clothes on the line behind the cabin when Isaiah approached from the corral, leading a gentle mare. "Thought you might like to learn the property," he suggested, the mare's reins in his hand. "Maisie here is the sweetest-tempered horse I've got, perfect for a lady rider." Eleanor glanced uncertainly at the horse. "I haven't ridden properly in years, and what about Lily?" Isaiah smiled, the expression coming more easily to him now. "Got that figured out too." He produced what looked like a modified sling from behind his back. "Made this last night. Saw something similar used by a Ute woman once. Keeps the baby secure against your chest, leaves your hands free for the reins." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. "You made this for us." Isaiah looked down, suddenly self-conscious. "Figured you might be getting cabin fever. Weather's fair today, might not stay that way much longer." The ride around the property became the first of many such excursions. Isaiah showed Eleanor his entire operation, the north pasture where the main herd grazed, the spring-fed pond that provided water even in the driest months, the stand of pine trees he harvested selectively for building and firewood. He spoke with quiet pride about his achievements and plans for expansion, and Eleanor listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering suggestions that Isaiah took seriously. As November deepened toward December, the weather grew harsher. Snow fell more frequently and stayed longer on the ground. The cattle were brought closer to the ranch buildings, requiring more daily attention. Isaiah worked from dawn until dusk most days, coming in exhausted but always taking time to play with Lily before dinner. One evening, after a particularly grueling day breaking ice on the water troughs, Isaiah sat by the fire while Eleanor prepared dinner. Lily lay on a blanket near his feet, batting at a wooden rattle he had carved for her. "She's growing so fast," he observed, a hint of wonder in his voice. Eleanor smiled from the stove. "She is. Hard to believe she's nearly 4 months old now." Isaiah reached down to let Lily grasp his finger, her tiny hand barely able to circle it. "She's got a good grip, strong like her mama." The casual compliment warmed Eleanor more than the fire. "I don't know about that. I wasn't very strong when you found us." Isaiah looked up, his expression serious. "That's where you're wrong. Takes more strength to leave a bad situation with a newborn than most men would have facing a grizzly." He paused, then added quietly, "I admire you, Eleanor. More than you know." Their eyes met across the room, and something shifted in the air between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since that first night by the railroad tracks. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm, and she turned back to the stove to hide her reaction. That night, after Isaiah had retired to his cot, and Eleanor lay in bed listening to Lily's soft breathing, she allowed herself to fully recognize the truth that had been building for weeks. She was falling in love with Isaiah Armstrong, his quiet strength, his unwavering kindness, his gentle way with Lily. Perhaps she had been falling since the moment he wrapped them both in his coat and told them to rest. But what did Isaiah feel? He had opened his home to them, certainly, but perhaps only out of Christian charity or simple human decency. He had never spoken of feelings beyond friendship, never made any move that could be construed as romantic interest. And even if he did share her feelings, there remained the uncomfortable fact that she was still legally married to Charles Howard. The shame of that reality kept Eleanor from voicing her growing affection for Isaiah, trapping her feelings behind a wall of propriety and fear. December brought the first major snowstorm of the season, trapping them in the cabin for 3 days while wind howled around the eaves and drifts piled against the doors. They passed the time playing checkers, reading aloud from Isaiah's collection of books, and telling stories by the fire. Isaiah revealed more of his childhood in Tennessee, his reluctant service in the Confederate Army despite personal misgivings about the cause, his decision to head west after the war to start fresh where a man was judged by his actions rather than his history. Never planned to stay in one place, he admitted on the second night of their confinement as they sat before the fire with mugs of hot cider. Lily had been asleep for hours, and the storm created a sense of isolation that encouraged confidences. Was just passing through, looking for someplace that felt right. What made you stay? Eleanor asked, watching the firelight play across his features. Isaiah stared into the flames, lost in memory. Came up over that ridge yonder one spring morning, saw this valley spread out below, green as emeralds with wildflowers everywhere. Something just clicked. He looked up, meeting her eyes. Felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. You ever experienced something like that? The question hung between them, laden with meaning. Eleanor found herself unable to look away from his gaze. Yes, she whispered. I think I have. When the storm finally broke, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white snow, Isaiah had to work doubly hard to check on his cattle and ensure their access to food and water. Eleanor worried as he rode out each morning in the bitter cold, returning with frost clinging to his beard and exhaustion etched in the lines of his face. You'll work yourself to death at this rate, she fretted one evening as she helped him remove his frozen boots by the fire. Been doing this alone for 8 winters, he reminded her. Just part of ranching. But you're not alone now, Eleanor said without thinking, then fell silent, unsure how he would interpret her words. Isaiah looked at her for a long moment, something unnamed flickering in his eyes. No, he agreed softly. I'm not alone now. Christmas approached, bringing with it a sense of anticipation Eleanor hadn't felt in years. She secretly sewed Isaiah a new shirt from fabric she found in a trunk, working on it during Lily's naps. She baked special treats with the limited supplies available, determined to make the holiday memorable. Isaiah, too, seemed caught up in the spirit, disappearing into his workshop in the barn for hours at a time, refusing to let Eleanor see what he was creating. He returned from a supply run to town with small packages wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, which he placed beneath the small pine tree they had cut and decorated with paper chains and carved wooden ornaments. On Christmas Eve, after a simple but festive dinner, they exchanged their modest gifts by firelight. Eleanor presented Isaiah with the shirt, neatly folded and wrapped in a piece of muslin. Eleanor, he breathed, running his fingers over the fine stitching, this is too fine for ranch work. Every man needs one good shirt, she replied, pleased by his reaction. For special occasions. Isaiah's gift to Eleanor was a silver locket on a delicate chain, simple but beautiful. Open it, he urged. Inside, Eleanor found a tiny portrait he had drawn of Lily, captured with remarkable skill. Isaiah, she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. It's perfect. I didn't know you could draw like this. Long winter nights give a man time to develop odd skills, he said with a self-deprecating smile. Then he presented his gift for Lily, a beautifully crafted wooden cradle to replace the drawer she had been sleeping in. She's outgrowing that makeshift bed, he explained as Eleanor ran her hands over the smooth wood, admiring the intricate carvings of flowers and leaves that decorated the headboard. Thought she deserved something proper. You made this yourself? Eleanor asked, though the answer was obvious in the proud yet anxious way he watched her inspection. Been working on it whenever I could steal a moment, he admitted. Oak sturdy, should last, well, a good long while. The unspoken implication that he had crafted something meant to endure, perhaps even for future children, hung in the air between them. Eleanor placed Lily in the cradle, watching as the baby immediately settled into its comfortable confines. It's beautiful, she said softly. Thank you. Their eyes met over the sleeping infant, and Eleanor felt a surge of emotion so powerful, it nearly overwhelmed her. In that moment, with the fire crackling and Christmas upon them, they felt like a family not by blood or law, but by something deeper and more meaningful, choice and care and growing love. Isaiah seemed about to speak, perhaps to give voice to what they both were feeling, when a particularly loud pop from the fire startled Lily awake. The moment passed as Eleanor tended to her daughter, and Isaiah retreated slightly, the familiar reserve settling back over his features. Later that night, after Isaiah had retired to his cot, and Eleanor lay awake listening to Lily's soft breathing in her new cradle, she heard him moving restlessly in the alcove. The thin wall between them suddenly seemed an insurmountable barrier, not just physical, but emotional. So much remained unsaid, feelings growing stronger with each passing day, yet confined by circumstances neither of them had created. Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering the way Isaiah had wrapped them both in his coat that first night, offering protection and comfort without expectation. Perhaps patience was needed now, allowing their feelings to unfold naturally in their own time. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the valley in a fresh blanket of white, while inside the cabin, two hearts drew closer despite the space between them. January brought the full fury of winter to the Colorado territory. Snow piled in drifts higher than the corral fences, and temperatures plunged so low that breath froze into crystals in the air. Isaiah worked constantly to keep the animals alive, breaking ice on water sources, hauling feed, and searching for cattle that strayed during brief breaks in the storms. Eleanor worried each time he rode out, watching through frosted windows until he disappeared into the swirling snow. During one particularly vicious blizzard, he failed to return at the expected time. As darkness fell and the storm intensified, her concern grew to full-blown panic. Lily, now 5 months old and becoming more interactive daily, seemed to sense her mother's distress, fussing and refusing to settle for her evening feed. Eleanor paced the cabin, alternating between checking the windows and soothing her daughter. "He's fine," she murmured, though whether she was reassuring Lily or herself wasn't clear. "Isaiah knows this land better than anyone. He'll come back to us." When the cabin door finally burst open shortly before midnight, admitting a blast of frigid air and a figure so encased in snow and ice as to be almost unrecognizable, Eleanor nearly collapsed with relief. She rushed forward as Isaiah stumbled in, his movements stiff and awkward from cold. "Thank God," she breathed, helping him toward the fire she'd built to blazing intensity. "I was so worried." Isaiah's face was alarming patches of white frostbite on his cheeks and nose, his lips blue with cold, snow crusted in his eyelashes and beard. His hands, when she removed his frozen gloves, were frightening shades of white and deep red. "Found 3 calves, trapped in a ravine," he managed through chattering teeth. "Had to dig them out." "You're half frozen," Eleanor said, frantically working to remove his ice-encrusted outer clothing. "We need to warm you gradually." She had seen frostbite before during harsh Illinois winters and knew the dangers of warming too quickly. Working methodically, she removed his coat, scarf, and boots, then wrapped him in blankets warmed by the fire. She placed his hands in tepid, not hot water, slowly adding warmer water as his skin began to regain feeling. "This will hurt," she warned as circulation began to return to his extremities. "Try to bear it." Isaiah gritted his teeth against the pain, sweat beading on his forehead despite his still lowered body temperature. Eleanor worked steadily, applying gentle pressure to his fingers and face, relieved to see healthy pink color gradually replacing the alarming white of frostbite. "Calves?" he asked through gritted teeth, concern for his animals apparently outweighing personal discomfort. "I'm sure they're fine," Eleanor soothed, though she had no way of knowing. "You got them out, that's what matters." When his body temperature had stabilized and the immediate danger of frostbite damage had passed, Eleanor helped Isaiah to his feet. "You need to rest now. Take the bed tonight." He started to protest, but she fixed him with a stern look that brooked no argument. "Isaiah Armstrong, you nearly froze to death out there. You're sleeping in a proper bed tonight if I have to tie you to it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips despite his exhaustion. "Yes, madam." Eleanor helped him to the bedroom, where Lily was finally sleeping peacefully in her cradle. Isaiah sank onto the mattress with a groan of relief, his body still trembling occasionally from the ordeal. "Thank you," he murmured as she tucked blankets around him. "Don't know what would have happened if—" "Hush," Eleanor interrupted gently. "Just rest now." She turned to leave, planning to take the cot for herself when Isaiah's hand caught hers. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and emotion, When I was out there in the worst of it, all I could think about was getting back to you and Lily." The simple confession, offered in the vulnerable space between life and death, struck Eleanor to her core. She squeezed his hand gently. "We were waiting for you. We'll always be waiting for you." Something shifted between them in the days following Isaiah's brush with death. A new openness, a willingness to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing steadily since Eleanor's arrival. Nothing was stated explicitly, both still held back from full declarations, but small gestures spoke volumes. Isaiah's hand lingering on Eleanor's when passing the coffee pot, Eleanor's fingers straightening his collar before he went outside, shared smiles over Lily's antics. January gave way to February, bringing slightly milder weather and the first hints that winter's grip might eventually loosen. Lily continued to grow and develop, now able to sit unsupported for brief periods and babbling constantly in her own invented language. Isaiah delighted in her progress, spending evenings on the floor with her, encouraging her attempts at mobility. "She's got determination, this one," he observed one evening as Lily struggled to roll from her back to her stomach, her little face scrunched in concentration. "Wonder where she gets that from?" Eleanor smiled, recognizing the gentle teasing. "Certainly not from me. I'm known for giving up easily." Isaiah looked up, his expression suddenly serious. "That's the furthest thing from the truth, Eleanor Howard. You're the strongest woman I've ever known." The use of her married name, Howard, landed like a splash of cold water, reminding Eleanor of the reality they had both been avoiding. She was still legally bound to Charles, a man who had made her life a living hell, but who nonetheless had legal claim to both her and Lily under current laws. Isaiah seemed to realize his misstep immediately. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "No," Eleanor interrupted, forcing a smile. "It's fine. It's my name after all." But the moment had soured, the unspoken obstacle between them suddenly very present. Eleanor excused herself shortly after, claiming fatigue, though sleep eluded her for hours as she contemplated their situation. The following morning, Isaiah was unusually quiet as he prepared for his day's work. Eleanor, too, felt the strain of their unaddressed circumstances. As he donned his coat and hat by the door, she finally broke the silence. "Isaiah, about last night, been thinking," he interrupted, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond her shoulder. "When spring comes and the pass is clear, you'll probably want to continue to your sister's in Missouri. Roads should be passable by April, usually." The statement, delivered in his matter-of-fact tone, felt like a physical blow. "Is that what you want?" Eleanor asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Isaiah finally met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "What I want doesn't signify much in this situation." "It signifies to me," Eleanor countered. A muscle worked in Isaiah's jaw as he wrestled with some internal conflict. Finally, he sighed deeply. "Eleanor, you know he stopped, reformulating his thoughts. "These past months have been. I've never." Another false start. Finally, he simply said, "You and Lily belong here, far as I'm concerned, but I won't hold you if you need to go." Before Eleanor could respond, he turned and walked out, closing the door firmly behind him. She stood in the silent cabin, Lily babbling contentedly in her cradle, trying to decipher what had just happened. Was he giving her an ultimatum, offering her freedom, or simply acknowledging the complexity of their situation? The day passed with aching slowness. Eleanor went through her usual tasks mechanically, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. By the time Isaiah returned in the late afternoon, she had reached a decision. "We need to talk," she said as he stamped snow from his boots by the door. "Properly. About everything." Isaiah nodded, his expression grave. "Let me wash up." They sat at the kitchen table, Lily sleeping nearby after her evening feed. For a long moment neither spoke, the weight of unspoken feelings filling the space between them. "I don't want to go to Missouri," Eleanor finally said, breaking the silence. Not unless you truly want us to leave." Isaiah's hands, calloused and strong, rested on the table between them. "I don't want you to go, ever." The stark honesty in his voice sent a shiver through Eleanor. "But I won't keep you here under false pretenses either." "What false pretenses?" she asked softly. Isaiah met her gaze directly. "That we can continue as we have been, pretending there's nothing between us but friendship and convenience, that I don't." He swallowed hard. That I don't love you both more than I thought possible. The declaration, so long hoped for yet still unexpected, stole Eleanor's breath. Isaiah, let me finish, he said gently. You're still married in the eyes of the law. I respect that, even if your husband doesn't deserve such consideration. I won't ask you to compromise your principles or reputation, especially not with Lily to consider. Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes at his honorable stance, even as frustration mounted at the obstacle between them. Charles abandoned us at that train station, she reminded him. In front of witnesses, including the sheriff. Surely that counts for something? It might, Isaiah acknowledged. But the law tends to favor husbands in these matters, especially when a child is involved. He hesitated, then added, and if he ever came back, tried to reclaim you by force. The implication was clear. Isaiah would fight for them, possibly kill or be killed rather than see them return to Charles. The thought chilled Eleanor to the bone. There is another option, she said carefully, an idea forming. I could seek a divorce. It's not easy for a woman, especially with no money for lawyers, but it is possible. Isaiah considered this. The nearest circuit judge comes through Pueblo in the spring. If you had cause, and from what little you've told me, you have plenty, he might grant it. Hope flickered in Eleanor's heart. Then we wait for spring and I petition for divorce. And until then, Isaiah said, his voice dropping to a gentle rumble, we continue as we have been. Friends, family of a sort, I won't dishonor you by suggesting anything else while you're legally bound to another man. Eleanor reached across the table, placing her hand atop his. You are the most honorable man I've ever known, Isaiah Armstrong, and I love you for it. The words, once spoken, seemed to lift a weight from her shoulders. I love you for 100 other reasons, too. Isaiah turned his hand to clasp hers, his eyes bright with emotion. I've loved you since I found you by those tracks, he admitted. You and this little one worked your way into my heart before I even knew what was happening. They sat in silence for a moment, hands joined across the table, the path forward clearer now despite the obstacles still in their way. Spring, Eleanor said, like a promise. Spring, Isaiah agreed. It always comes eventually. The remainder of winter passed with renewed purpose. February gave way to March, bringing milder days interspersed with occasional snowstorms. The changing season seemed to mirror the transformation in the cabin, a sense of anticipation, of new beginnings on the horizon. Isaiah and Eleanor maintained the boundaries they had established, never crossing the line of propriety, but the acknowledged love between them colored every interaction. Simple moments became precious, reading together by the fire, teaching Lily new skills, planning for the future they hoped to share. One sunny afternoon in late March, when the snow had retreated enough to reveal patches of earth, Isaiah took Eleanor and Lily on a walk to a nearby hillside. Want to show you something, he explained, carrying Lily securely against his chest in the carrier he had made. They climbed the gentle slope, Eleanor marveling at how her stamina had improved over the months of ranch living. At the crest, Isaiah stopped, pointing to a flat area just below the summit. Been thinking, he said, an unusual hesitancy in his voice. If things go as we hope in Pueblo, if the judge grants your divorce, maybe we could build a proper house here. Eleanor looked at the spot sheltered from the worst winds by the hill itself, with a clear view of the entire valley, including the original cabin and outbuildings. The cabins served me well, Isaiah continued, but it's small for a family. Thought maybe a real house with separate bedrooms for the children, a proper kitchen for you. Children, Eleanor asked, picking up on the plural. Isaiah's cheeks reddened slightly above his beard. Was getting ahead of myself. I just meant it's perfect, Eleanor interrupted, her heart full as she envisioned the future he described. Absolutely perfect. Lily chose that moment to gurgle happily, as if adding her approval to the plan. Isaiah smiled down at her, then back at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a hope that matched her own. Nothing's certain, he cautioned. The judge will see the truth, Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. And if not, we'll find another way, together. April arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the valley and the first circuit court session in Pueblo. Isaiah arranged for a neighboring rancher's wife to care for Lily, assuring Eleanor that Mrs. Peterson had raised 7 children of her own and would guard Lily as fiercely as a mother bear. Still, it's the first time I've been away from her, Eleanor fretted as they prepared to depart for the 2-day journey. We'll be back before she knows we're gone, Isaiah promised, though they both knew that wasn't strictly true. At nearly 8 months old, Lily was keenly aware of her surroundings and deeply attached to both Eleanor and Isaiah. The journey to Pueblo passed quickly, with Eleanor alternating between anxiety about leaving Lily and nervousness about the legal proceedings ahead. Isaiah maintained his calm presence beside her, offering quiet reassurance when her courage flagged. "Whatever happens," he said as they approached the growing town of Pueblo, "remember you're not alone anymore." The courthouse was crowded with petitioners, many who had traveled days or weeks to have their cases heard by the circuit judge. Eleanor's palms sweated as she and Isaiah waited on a hard wooden bench for her name to be called. She had prepared her testimony carefully, ready to detail Charles's abuse, abandonment, and the witnesses who had seen him publicly renounce her and Lily at the train station. When she finally stood before Judge Harmon, a stern-faced man with spectacles and a reputation for fairness, Eleanor spoke with a clarity and conviction that surprised even herself. Isaiah remained in the courtroom, a solid presence in the back row, his steady gaze giving her courage when her voice threatened to falter. Judge Harmon listened impassively, asking occasional questions to clarify points about witnesses and dates. When Eleanor finished, he removed his spectacles and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Mrs. Howard," he said finally, "I've heard many petitions for divorce in my years on the bench, some frivolous, some desperate, most somewhere in between." He replaced his spectacles, fixing Eleanor with a penetrating gaze. "Yours falls into none of these categories. It is, rather, a straightforward case of abandonment and prior cruelty with credible witnesses to both." Hope surged in Eleanor's heart as the judge continued. "The law gives me discretion in these matters, particularly in the territories where stricter state statutes may not apply. I find sufficient cause to grant your petition for divorce from Charles Howard, with full custody of the minor child Lily Howard granted to you as the fit and proper parent." Eleanor's legs nearly buckled with relief. She gripped the rail before her to steady herself as the judge completed the legal pronouncements and signed the necessary documents. "One last matter," Judge Harmon said, peering over his spectacles. "You'll be resuming your maiden name, I presume." Eleanor hadn't considered this aspect. Her maiden name, Chapman, represented a life before Charles but also before Isaiah. Before she could respond, the judge noticed her hesitation. "Or perhaps," he said with unexpected perception, glancing toward Isaiah in the back of the courtroom, "you have other plans for your name in the near future." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "Yes, Your Honor, I believe I might." Judge Harmon permitted himself a small smile. "Then we shall leave that matter open for now. The divorce is granted, effective immediately." He tapped his gavel once, signaling the end of the proceedings. Eleanor turned from the bench, her heart pounding with joy and disbelief. She was free, truly free for the first time in years. Isaiah met her eyes from across the courtroom, his expression one of contained elation. He waited until she reached him before speaking. "It's done," he asked quietly. "It's done," she confirmed. "Lily and I are legally free of Charles Howard." They stepped outside into the bright spring sunshine, both momentarily overwhelmed by the significance of what had just occurred. Pedestrians bustled past on the boardwalks, horses and wagons clopped down the street, but Eleanor noticed none of it. Her world had narrowed to the man beside her, and the future suddenly wide open before them. "I think," Isaiah said carefully, "this calls for a celebration before we head back to the ranch." He led her to a small restaurant near the courthouse, where they shared a meal better than anything available at the ranch. Throughout the lunch, their conversation remained light, neither quite ready to address the implications of the day's events. It was only as they prepared to leave town, their horses saddled and provisions secured for the journey home, that Isaiah finally broached the subject. "Eleanor," he said, taking her hands in his. They stood in the relative privacy of the livery stable, the afternoon sun slanting through dusty windows. I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures, never have been. I've never needed those things, she replied softly. Isaiah nodded, swallowing hard before continuing. When I found you and Lily by those tracks last fall, I thought I was just doing what any decent man would do. Didn't realize I was finding my future. He squeezed her hands gently. I don't have much to offer except a small ranch, a life of hard work, and a heart that's yours completely. Eleanor felt tears gathering in her eyes as she recognized the proposal forming in his words. I'd wait longer, court you properly like you deserve, Isaiah continued, but I've spent too many years alone, and these months with you and Lily have shown me what I've been missing. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a simple gold band. It was my mother's, he explained, been carrying it since we left for Pueblo, hoping. Yes, Eleanor whispered, not needing to hear the formal question. Yes, Isaiah. Joy transformed his features as he gently placed the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her all along. Eleanor Chapman, he said, using her maiden name with deliberate meaning, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you and Lily make a family with me, properly and in the eyes of God and the law? We already are a family, Eleanor replied, tears flowing freely now. This just makes it official. Their kiss was gentle at first, the tentative exploration of two people who had restrained their feelings for so long, then deepened into something more profound, a promise of the life they would build together. The return journey to the ranch seemed to fly by, both eager to retrieve Lily and begin their life together in earnest. Mrs. Peterson greeted them with knowing eyes when they arrived to collect the baby, who squealed with delight at the sight of her mother, and the man who had become, in every way that mattered, her father. Someone's been missing you something fierce, Mrs. Peterson said, handing the squirming infant to Eleanor, though she's been good as gold otherwise. She glanced pointedly at Eleanor's left hand, where Isaiah's mother's ring now rested. I see congratulations are in order. Word spread quickly through the scattered community surrounding Sonora. Within days, neighboring ranchers and their wives began arriving with gifts and well wishes. A date was set for the wedding just 2 weeks hence, to be performed by the traveling preacher who visited the area monthly. Those 2 weeks passed in a flurry of preparation. Eleanor, with help from the neighboring women, sewed a simple but elegant wedding dress from fine fabric purchased in Pueblo. Isaiah, with the men's assistance, began work on the foundation for the new house on the hillside, determined that construction would be well underway before winter returned. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the valley resplendent in spring glory. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, trees burst with new leaves, and birds sang as if providing their own celebration of the union about to take place. The ceremony was held outside the cabin, with neighbors gathered in a semicircle to witness the vows. Eleanor wore her new dress, her hair adorned with spring blossoms, while Isaiah had donned not only his best trousers, but also the shirt Eleanor had made him for Christmas. Lily, dressed in a tiny white dress sewn by Mrs. Peterson, was held by that good woman during the ceremony, though her eyes rarely left her mother and soon-to-be official father. The preacher spoke of love and commitment, of building a life together through good times and bad. When it came time for the vows, Isaiah took Eleanor's hands in his voice steady and sure as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her for all the days of his life. Eleanor, looking into the eyes of the man who had wrapped her and Lily in his coat that cold night by the railroad tracks, felt her heart might burst with happiness as she made the same promises in return. By the authority vested in me, the preacher concluded, I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Isaiah's kiss was tender yet passionate, a public declaration of the love that had grown between them over the months of shared meals, quiet conversations, and mutual respect. The gathered neighbors cheered, and someone began playing a fiddle, signaling the start of the celebration that would continue well into the evening. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the valley, Isaiah and Eleanor stood together near the foundation of what would become their new home. Lily rested comfortably in Isaiah's arms, her little hand curled around one of his fingers. Mrs. Armstrong, he said, testing the name with evident satisfaction. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, gazing out at the land that was now truly her home. It's perfect. Everything is perfect. Isaiah kissed the top of her head, then Lily's, his expression one of profound contentment. Not bad for a man who once found a woman and her crying baby beside the railroad tracks. Eleanor smiled at the memory, no longer painful now that it had led to such joy. You wrapped us both in your coat and told us to rest, she recalled softly. I think I've been falling in love with you since that moment. Funny, Isaiah replied, his voice deep with emotion. I think I have too. As twilight deepened into night, stars began to appear above them, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting months ago. But now, instead of fear and uncertainty, Eleanor felt only peace and the certainty that she and Lily had found where they truly belonged with Isaiah Armstrong, the man who had not just saved them from the cold, but had given them a home, a future, and his heart. The years that followed brought all the joy and challenges that make up a life well lived. The new house on the hillside was completed before the first snows of winter, a testament to Isaiah's skill and the community's willingness to help one of their own. With 3 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the structure, it was grander than anything Eleanor had dared to hope for. Isaiah insisted on carrying both her and Lily across the threshold the first time they entered their completed home. Starting as we mean to go on, he explained, his smile wide beneath his beard. As a family, the Armstrong Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Isaiah's knowledge of cattle and the land, combined with Eleanor's careful management of their finances and household, created a thriving operation that expanded steadily over the years. They added sheep to their livestock, finding that the animals did well on the higher pastures unsuitable for cattle. Lily grew from an infant to a toddler to a lively child with her mother's golden hair, and an independent spirit that both delighted and occasionally exasperated her parents. She shadowed Isaiah constantly, learning to ride almost before she could walk properly, absorbing his knowledge of animals and the land like a sponge soaks up water. She's going to be running this ranch before she's 15. Isaiah predicted proudly after 6-year-old Lily correctly identified which cows in the herd were likely to calve first that spring. With you encouraging her every step of the way, Eleanor teased, though she was equally proud of their daughter's quick mind and natural abilities. The family expanded too, just as Isaiah had hoped when he spoke of building a house with bedrooms for the children. Their son James came along in the 2nd year of their marriage, a sturdy boy with his father's dark hair and thoughtful demeanor. 2 years later, twins Rebecca and Rachel arrived, testing even Eleanor's considerable organizational skills with their boundless energy and uncanny ability to be in 2 places at once. Through the years, Eleanor occasionally received news of Charles Howard. He had moved to San Francisco after leaving Sonora, apparently finding success in real estate speculation during the city's expansion. He never attempted to contact Eleanor or Lily, a blessing for which she thanked God regularly. Isaiah legally adopted Lily on her 5th birthday, making official what had been true in their hearts since the beginning. The little girl had insisted on taking his surname even before the adoption, proudly introducing herself as Lily Armstrong to anyone who asked. On the 10th anniversary of their first meeting beside the railroad tracks, Isaiah surprised Eleanor with a special gift, a small silver train engine on a chain, exquisitely detailed and clearly custom-made. To remember where our journey began, he explained as he fastened it around her neck. Eleanor touched the pendant gently, then looked up at her husband. The years had added a few threads of silver to his dark hair and deepened the laugh lines around his eyes, but he was still the same steady, honorable man who had wrapped her and Lily in his coat that cold night. I don't need reminders, she said softly, but I'll treasure it anyway. That night, after the children were asleep in their beds, Eleanor and Isaiah sat on the porch of their hilltop home, watching the moon rise over the valley that had become the center of their world. Isaiah's arm rested comfortably around Eleanor's shoulders, his fingers absently playing with the silver train engine at her throat. "Any regrets?" he asked, the question partly teasing but with a hint of genuine curiosity. "About staying in Colorado instead of going to Missouri. About building a life with a simple rancher." Eleanor turned to study his face in the moonlight, seeing in it all the love and security she had once thought forever beyond her reach. "Not a single one," she assured him, leaning in to kiss him softly. "This is exactly where I was always meant to be." As if to emphasize her words, a shooting star blazed across the night sky, a brief, brilliant reminder of how fleeting chances can be, and how precious it is when we recognize and seize the moments that will define our lives. Eleanor Howard Armstrong, once a desperate young mother with a crying baby beside railroad tracks, now watched that celestial display from the safe harbor of her husband's embrace, surrounded by the home and family they had built together. Sometimes, she reflected, life's darkest moments lead unexpectedly to its greatest blessings. Sometimes salvation comes in the form of a stranger's coat and a simple instruction to rest. And sometimes, if you're very fortunate, that rest becomes a beginning rather than an end, the first peaceful moment in a lifetime of love.